I'm very thrilled to see some of these names coming up here. This is a wonderful turnout in terms of these somewhat important people in SABR. But anyway, I wanted to say that we're in our uh, winter quarter for our first season with the 19th Century Baseball Book Club. And we were very fortunate to have Paul step up and say, "Yeah, I'd like to try to do a book." And he picked a real good one, and we'll say more about that. I won't say much more about that, but it was a really good one. And I want to thank him. So we have three books coming up this quarter. There's one a month, and I'll say a little bit more about that at the end. And I want to make a couple of announcements. First of all, I'm sorry, Joanne, not to come to Boston for Truck Day.
I know it's like a national holiday. Well, I'm hoping it's going to be better than last year. I was the only one that showed up last year, and it was so bitter cold. I mean, it was like the 2 days that we had actually bitter cold weather in Boston, and it was on that one. That was yeah, actually it was a Friday and the Saturday, and SABR Day was the next day. Bitter cold on that day. I know Bill Nowlin said that he was going to meet me at Truck Day. He said he stepped out of wherever he was, got one lungful of the air, turned around and went back in. So back home. So I did do Truck Day, and I did go to the beach, the Bleacher Bar, and had a hamburger and drank 2 beers, which I only usually get one.
Well, for the uninitiated, that's the day that the truck leaves Fenway for spring training. With all the equipment.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a ritual type thing. I've been to many of them. I think my favorite one was watching Johnny Pesky having the honor of driving the truck away from Fenway Park. I'm sure that they changed drivers as soon as they got on the site, but the effect was excellent.
Anyway.
Yeah.
So we do have one book a month for the next couple of months, and then we're going to go into our spring season. So without further ado, I want to thank Bob again for getting us all up online here, and let him introduce our moderator for this book discussion, and then I'll say a few words at the end about what's coming up this month. Okay, Bob.
Our moderator is Paul Langendorfer, who has the indoor record for most syllables in his last name.
It's phonetically correct.
And it's certainly is different from Bales. Yeah. And all I add is E. So,
yep.
But Paul has been a regular with us over these months, as we've been going since July, I believe it was, Peter. And we're heading in a new direction here with a fiction book. Or what is it? If I Never Get Back. I never quite get it right. I think it's If I Never Get Back.
If I Never Get Back.
I hope I never get back, or I wish I never. Who knows? It's one of those things, but it's a wonderful piece of by Darryl Brock, written 30 years ago, I guess. And Paul, go ahead and let's get started.
All right, easy enough. So Joanne, I'm just going to say this real quick. Today was also a day for me. I put the time off for to go to the home opener. So I understand what you're talking about with Truck Day. So that was my thing. So this is also, I'll say 2 quick things for me. These are actually two momentous days my week. On Saturday, I went to see my alma mater, Canisius College, play at Air Force in ice hockey in Air Force, and there was 8 of us for Canisius. So I was a little intimidated. That doesn't happen very often. And with all the esteemed folks that are here, I'm not going to lie, I'm a little intimidated tonight. So I've kind of I put together just a list of some questions, some talking points. So definitely I'm just here to start the conversation. I'd like to open it up and hear what everyone has to say about this book. So for me, this is the third time I've actually read this book. The first time I read this book was really instrumental to me. When you start playing vintage baseball, this is sort of a book that is your handbook. Most folks in the vintage baseball circuit, they will tell you, pick this book up, read it, and you'll understand, which is true. It was also a really memorable read for me because I actually read it on the airplane between Denver and Buffalo when I was going back to see my dad for surgery, and I wasn't sure, obviously, the outcome. So it was very hard to read this book. In a lot of ways, you have a lot of the baseball ties between father and son. So just a little back note on that book, on the book for me. I love this book. Like I said, this is my third read through for this book. I every now and again I'll just kind of pick it up and flip through it. I think one of the things that fascinates me most about this book is it was written in 1989. So when you read these things, and I'll kind of talk a little bit about these things, it impresses me immensely, Darryl Brock, and what he's done and what he's put together and how he's researched this book. I think this book to write in 2021 is a heck of a lot different book. It's a lot easier book to write because we have the research at our fingertips. We pick up a SABR, we talked about it beforehand, a SABR manuscript, or we pick up, the internet, and we can do a quick Google search and I can find anything I want in the 69 Red Stockings. But with him, he sat obviously poring over microfilm to put this book together. So with that, I wanted to start out with kind of my first question that I'm going to pose to everyone here. I want to know, is this book a factual account of the Red Stockings? So it's fiction versus fact. We all know that. I mean, we read through the accounts, and I read through it with my phone. The scores are all correct. But I mean, what about some of these other instances? So for example, we know that Hurley was kicked off the team. He was never kicked off the team. We have instances of, what happened, what transpired throughout the book. So I'm going to throw that out as my first question. Was this book a factual account of the Red Stockings?
Can we just all jump in and talk?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Wide open.
There's tons of facts in here. But it is a novel, and he moves things along. Were the Fenians really involved with baseball in 1869? Maybe, but that really happened. There really was a Fenian army, and there really was an attempt to invade Canada. The scores are correct. There actually is a Fowler in the box score, which maybe in some of the Red Stockings games. Who knows if Mark Twain was really like that? But I've read a lot of stuff about Mark Twain, and Sam Clemens kind of was like that. So I was impressed by personally how he made it come alive for me, even if every fact isn't alive. The stockings for me were always these weird, guys with mustaches and still photos that didn't move. And I think this really brought them to life.
I thought the same thing because they mentioned William Craver, being in Troy, and I knew that was the case and everything. So I got the impression. I didn't research it all the way you guys did, like you said, Paul, but I picked up a couple things here and there, and I thought, well, that really happened. I'm sorry, Peter, I cut you off there.
No, not at all. Having just read today, unbelievably, just coincidentally, having read this manuscript, we're reading this manuscript. It's a full-length book. But the chapter that I came across today to read today was on the 69 Red Stockings. And what's amazing is how parallel, in a way, with the exception of the fictitious story, things like game scores and tight games and tough games, and for example, the games up at the game up at Troy, when they played the farmers up there, they really, the unions, they really had a very tough game. It's articulated that way in the novel, and and that was truly the reality of what was played in a nonfiction sense. So I found it very, very valuable. I mean, and just reconfirming today, reading that chapter on the actual season, uh, really did, really did speak to how accurate Darryl Brock was.
Peter said that it came alive in the fiction form, and that's why I like reading historical fiction. John Jakes on the Civil War, where the Secretary of War, Simon Cameron, came to life as just one more corrupt politician. And the same thing here. But I guess I didn't really know where Asa Brainerd and some of these guys, were those accurate portrayals of them? Does anybody know that?
So that's a really good point, Stu. That was actually my next thing on my list. Were these true portrayals of the Stockings? And what I wanted to know was, are they true portrayals? Were these character creations? So, and I'm going to look at a couple things in that sentiment is, we see the situation with Sweezy. He's portrayed as pretty much a loudmouth, boastful, he doesn't like Sam from the beginning. They have a fight. He has problems throughout. I mean, he's very much, you want to not like Sweezy. Was that the true Sweezy? And then I'm going to look at the other side of it too, and I'm going to ask the question you mentioned about Asa. I'm going to ask a question about what about the relationship between George and Asa Brainerd? I mean, it was very, especially as the book went on, their relationship really started to get strained. So, and I don't know what people think about that. That's a really good segue into where we wanted to go.
And the question is, Darryl Brock still with us? Has anybody been able to talk to him?
I spoke with him just as the book came out. So that's almost 35 years ago. I bumped into him at a couple of meetings, and he was a very personable and charming fellow, and always available and open to talk. But what he told me was that he tried to do the best he could historically with the people, but he had to put something in their personalities where he didn't have something to keep the story going and to put different things within the novel.
Well, again,
I don't know what those were, but go ahead, Peter.
No, it's just saying again. Well, one thing I know for sure, his characterization of George Wright was completely in line with this manuscript that I read today. And when I went to when I finished the chapter, each chapter is footnoted, and I noticed that many of the footnotes were post production of this novel. However, there are some footnotes that indicate, the Cincinnati Enquirer or the Clipper or whatever of that era. So I would imagine that what he was able to do, at least in the case of George Wright, he was able to go back and glean from those contemporary newspaper reports, because the other footnotes are post novel. He was able to glean enough about George Wright to really, really capture him in the book. He was that two-piece smile, tremendously athletic, probably one of the best players in baseball of this or other eras.
If I could pipe in just a bit, I think that it's great that he probably followed as much accuracy historically that he could, but I think the overwhelmingly important thing is that he was an excellent writer. And I can read any kind of genre, anything at all, as long as the writer is good. And so I found the story really great. I've read, quite a few, well, fantasy and time travel and all that. This is one of the best time travel novels I ever read. Now, he also wrote Havana Havana Heat. Anyway, that was also a very well-written book with a really great character, which he probably embellished a little bit, as I expected he did in this one too. And also remember that there was a sequel to this book. So apparently, I think that Darryl Brock really, really liked the subject so much that he wrote a second book in this series. My big regret is he didn't write a third. And
I agree.
yeah, I really do. I really think it's a great, great two books. Now, the thing is, when you finish the first one and it's absolutely great, you're dying to read the second one, you pick that up, but it does suffer from a little bit of sequel letdown.
Sequelitis.
Yeah, okay, that's a good, yeah, it does, because you expect way, way more, because the first one was so wonderful, the second one's going to be just as wonderful, and that's unfair. The second one was great, but not as good as the first, but I found that to be pretty much the same with any other list of books that you come across. But I don't think it matters as much that he probably had to embellish all that. After all, the book Eight Men Out had a little bit of omission and addition and all that. So I can forgive Darryl Brock from doing a little bit of that, especially in this kind of a story. So
Well, Eight Men Out was supposed to be nonfiction.
Right, exactly.
And if it was labeled as historical fiction, but yeah, right, we would be very forgiving of Darryl because that's what he's writing, fiction.
Yeah. And I do wish that he had written a third one, even though the second, the sequel, which is Two in the Field, and I would recommend reading it, of course, and then also a bit of regret that he didn't go into a third book, but you can't have everything. So I hope everybody has read it, and if you haven't, well, please do. Okay, done.
You cut to the end, Joanna. That was actually going to be my last question, is should we do that book later? But we could close out with that. So
yeah, right, yeah.
Let me bring it back for a moment to Asa Brainerd. So here's my question that I wanted to bring up to the group about Asa Brainerd. And I wanted to bring up about his character. And again, it kind of goes back to fact versus fiction. Now, we know that there was, obviously there was the game where he basically said here, let me just grab it here if I may. Let me see here. He said, matched every damn day. They think we're machines. Use us however it suits them, which means scramble for every dime in sight. And he basically didn't show up that day, which I thought was also kind of an oxymoron. He says he makes a scramble for every dime in sight, but then we also have the ability, as we read the book, to see the Stockings books are not as good as we would think they were, what they would hope to be. So my question is, as we watch the character of Asa Brainerd develop, for lack of a better word, I mean, are we looking at a person who is suffering from fatigue? Are we looking at him with his gambling debts? Was he really going to throw that game? And how much of that is truth about the game where he was going to throw it?
I mean, without doing the research myself, which I haven't done, and unless somebody else has really dug into that, who knows if they would have really thrown the game or not. The great thing about this novel for me is it makes it plausible how he develops the characters. And you could see how that was happening. And of course, gambling in the 19th century on baseball was a big deal. There were gamblers everywhere because there weren't that many other sports to bet on. And the fact that the haymakers, as established, would have tried to bribe people. I don't know if the kidnapping of Andy is real. I mean, I would have to look that up, and it's too good to be true that they would do that. But you could argue, if you want to be factual, that the fact of Sam showing up from the 20th century, of course, changes the past. So things happen that wouldn't have happened if he hadn't shown up. That just works. But I think it's plausible the way they put it. And, you know, what was the old, you know, they're professionals. They're there for the money.
Well, Sam,
Peter, I think you read my notes, Peter. I'm just saying,
Oh.
Peter was just speaking. I think you read my notes. I'm just saying, that's all.
well, Sam got into some of the things I liked was his late 20th century understanding of social things and catching on to the racism that he knew was back there. But I think at some point when he was questioning treatment of Native Americans and then realizing I'm in 1869, you're not going to question manifest destiny or something like that. But another thing, you know, you talk about Brainerd, any of these guys, Sweezy, we see the outward things. Brainerd had gambling problem, and somebody is this surly. Would somebody from 1990 maybe have a better understanding of mental health? If somebody had an anxiety disorder or depression, and be able to not even bring it up, and there's no medication for it or no understanding, no sympathy for it. I suppose that would be getting a little bit too much into the psychology of it. But Sam did have a 1990 understanding of the world and had to, you know, which we'd all have. We talk about going back to the good old days of 1950. I think we'd be appalled at some of the stuff that we couldn't really even speak out against at that time.
I kind of agree with Peter. I think one of the earmarks of a great historical novel is when you can't tell whether what you're reading really happened or just might have happened according to what the author says. You know, if he had an asteroid hit and kill the other team, you know, that clearly kind of spoils everything. But the way he wrote this, it's not clear whether or not when he's going from fact to fiction. And that's what makes a great historical novel.
And he's also possibly using the characters just to touch on some broad themes that we know happened, right? The gambling, the social dynamic of any team, right? Of how hard people feel they're being pushed past their limits, their fatigue, their value to the team is not being you know, paid accordingly. I mean, those are age-old themes. There's, you know, they're still with us today in many ways. So using a character in the book to drive some of those themes that were prevalent at that time or universal. I mean, that's what an author of these type of books should be doing. So.
And also the color behind all the events. I wonder if he researched that too, like the railroad I thought was pretty neat. And then just having all the other characters like Mark Twain in there too, which you could embellish at will. And I don't know that much about Mark Twain, but you know, it just it certainly wasn't over the top, some of the things that were going on. And I think he could probably felt free to embellish a lot with Mark Twain and just research a little bit or more than a little bit with the baseball characters too. So it all really blended together and with local color and the times in which it was written too.
So Jack, I'm going to call on you real quick while you're still in front of me here. What was Mark Twain's role in the story? Was he kind of the narrator? Was he someone that it was his job to put Sam onto the gold? What do you think his role was in the story? And that's I'll start with Jack since you were just mentioning Mark, and then I'll open it up to the floor. So
well, I did view him as something of a narrator there to get to push Sam along. Yeah, I mean he was a really important character in the book for that reason, I thought. And that's what kind of made it all gel for me. As I said, he had the historical people there, like the baseball players. And then here we got his idol, Mark Twain, came in to kind of carry out the story too. And I thought that was it just was seamless, I thought too, Paul, with Mark Twain in there.
Any other thoughts on Mr. Samuel Clemens from the gallery?
Yeah, I got the impression that Darryl Brock was somewhat of a Mark Twain fan, and that he probably knew a lot about Mark Twain. You know, it would be something, you know, of interest of his, I imagine, as a 19th century, you know, writing a 19th century based book. you have this great 19th century figure that he probably knew a lot about, and he knew a lot of intricacies like Mark Twain's love for his fiance and so forth and so on. So I think it's I think Twain became just like Jack says. I think he kind of like became this narrator in a sense, and then pushed the story along and right to the end.
Well, the other thing that Twain does is it gets Sam out away from baseball. When I first started reading the novel, I thought, wow, this could be great. We're going to go to every Cincinnati Red Stocking game and get the play-by-play. But clearly that wasn't entirely on his mind. And what surprised me was how the games became secondary as Sam got involved with Twain and went and got the gold and had the romance with Kate. And that was great. Because I think if it had just been he played it, he was there for all the games, it wouldn't have been nearly as interesting. And of course, setting up a world where some mystical, magical power brings him back, and things like, yeah, you really can talk to the dead, that Clara Antonio character, who is a medium that really actually talks to dead people, because Colm, the ghost of Colm, is a real character. And all of that, I think, brings the novel to another level. So it's not just at one level, hey, let's talk about what happened at every Cincinnati Red Stocking game.
So just to jump in here, Claire Antonia, one thing I thought was interesting about her is you could almost say maybe it was Sam's, or we'll talk a little more about who Sam is, but Sam's spirit guide, because in the end of the book, Claire Antonia appears to him twice in the actual end of the book. So what is she? Is she a spirit guide? Is she something else? Is she a manifestation? Because every character in the book, she's also another piece like Twain that ties everyone together. Every other character in the book that's an important character has met her, interacted with her one way or another. So I think that's one of the things, like you said, that makes it really interesting and really a really good read, is that even if your interest starts to wane, and like you made a good point about you're waning maybe from baseball, if you're waning away from something, or maybe you're tired of reading about, this, he's forgetting in this fight or that fight or whatever it might be, you're always drawn into another twist or another wrinkle or another character that's going to steer you a different direction. So, like you said, Joanne, he's a great writer, and I've really enjoyed this book, like I said, immensely. So I'm actually going to step back for a moment we talked briefly about this, and this evidently always comes up whenever we talk about early baseballism. We talked about it in the field book. We talked about it as some of the earlier books we read about the role of gamblers. And I think LeCarron and McDermott play a huge role in this book. They're actually, I mean, I first of all, I'd like to know what your thoughts are, again, and same kind of questions, true representations of gamblers and ruffians of the day. And if that's the case, I've always asked myself, well, why couldn't they just keep them out? Well, you could see why they couldn't just keep them out. It wasn't that simple. That's why we have fences. That's why we have things like this. So, but in that, I'd like to, we talk about the Fenian Brotherhood. Were they truly members of the Fenian Brotherhood? Were they in it for the gambling side of it? What was their role itself? So, and then we'll talk that, and then I've got a question about Sam and how he relates to McCarran. But anybody want to go ahead and give me their thoughts on McCarran and/or McDermott?
Well, McDermott
Crickets?
is
No one?
yeah, McDermott is one of the Irish revolutionaries, right? Am I confusing the character?
I think that was O'Donovan.
Oh, yeah. Okay, I'm sorry. Oh, yeah.
McDermott and LeCarron are actually the gamblers, and one of them is like,
Right.
I think there were basically like two levels, for lack of a better word, of them. One was more of a thug, and one was more of a the brains behind the operation is the way I read him.
Right. And Morrissey, I mean, is mentioned as maybe a step up. You know, he's kind of the power figure in that dark side of the, you know, what's going on. And Morrissey, just in the chapter I read today, they talk about the haymakers, you know, having, you know, a tough, they called it, the writer called it an owner. I don't know exactly, he didn't get into the detail of the ownership because that wasn't really the mark of his book. But to me, I think Morrissey was someone to be reckoned with as a 19th century quasi-criminal.
I mean, those characters show the corruption. One's a congressman, but he's involved with gamblers and thugs and probably gets support from them. I was just at one point, I think the other reporter is trying to explain to Sam why Lake Huron is bad, and he said he came out of the dead rabbits.
Yeah.
And of course, Sam has no idea what the dead rabbits were because the movie Gangs of New York had not been filmed until the 90s. But that was, if you ever saw Gangs of New York, that they talk about all those really tough street gangs in New York, and one of them was the Dead Rabbits.
Mm-hmm.
I spend too much time watching movies and noting really weird facts about them.
Well, I could tell you that the New York City Police Museum will verify for you that the dead rabbits were real and real tough.
Could it be that Darryl Brock has brought in several subjects that are near and dear to his heart and interests, such as baseball, Mark Twain, the Fenians, throw in a little bit of a romance just to keep it going. But he pulled in all sorts of interests and subjects that he was interested in, how to weave them into the story using all of those particular bits of history. And I think it looks like fun. It looks like it was a great deal of fun writing it up. But I kind of have a feeling that's how he brought all of the subjects together. Wish he was here, we could, pick his brain on that. But yeah, we know he liked baseball because he also wrote the book Havana Heat, which is also baseball themed. And who doesn't like Mark Twain? And perhaps he has a few other interests in the back of his mind too about the Fenians and how are we going to pull them all together in one book? Well, I think it's easy enough to do, especially for the time frame that this book took place in.
I don't know where he is. He's not in SABR anymore, but I did a little Googling, and for Google Books, it lists Darryl as the author of these books. Said he was born in 1940, so said he's 83 years old. So they're still speaking in present tense, but maybe it would be some fun sometime to do the sequel. And if anybody who's really good at tracking people down could find him, to have him join us.
Yeah,
that'd be cool.
that would be.
So let's go ahead and do this. Let's shift over to our main character. Let's shift to talk about Sam a little bit. Actually a lot of it, but I've got some, again, this is my third go around in the book, and I found myself, this is an interesting statement, and I'll kind of talk through this as we go, but I don't know why, but this go around I found myself not liking Sam as the first time I read this book. I felt that there were a lot of things that I questioned his judgment. I questioned his knowledge. I question other things. I'll get to that, but first I'm going to throw one out here. So just to kind of tie in with the role of the gamblers, why did Sam feel that whenever he seemed to confront the gamblers, he did it alone? The Stockings went on to California and he's like, oh, they're coming for me. I'm going to take the next train. He went and he did it. The only real time that I felt that he didn't do it alone or wasn't, you know, and maybe it was just the way the gamblers did it themselves, or the thugs, if you will. But when he took the entire team to rescue Andy, but I'm gonna throw something out there, and this is maybe a very very far left turn, but what was Sam's motive in this? Did he not think of his daughters? Did he not think of Caitlin or Timmy? Was this the author's way of showing us the muscular Christianism movement maybe of that day? And Sam was portraying it. I know that might be a stretch, but I don't know. What do you guys think?
Hmm.
Hmm.
You
I don't
didn't
know.
expect that one, did
Hmm.
you, Joanne?
Yeah.
I know.
How,
Yeah.
how
Oh,
very
wow, that's a
articulate.
lot.
Yeah, it's a lot to process there. I think Sam, I always thought of Sam as, you know, to the extent that any character is speaking for Darryl Brock, it's Sam. I would love to know if Darryl Brock was a boxing champion in college or some of those other things, or a baseball player. It'd be like Sam, just, you know, coincidentally happened to be a great boxer who also played baseball and was in the perfect spot. You know, there's a lot of that stuff you set up or there's no story. But clearly, not clearly, this is what I think. What I think is he assumed coming from the 90s, he would be a superior person to all those folks because he knows about antibiotics and who Willie Mays was and knows how the future is going to turn out. And he forgot that people are people wherever they are. The reason you can't, the reason there's so, historians have so many different opinions about whether the 19th century was a great time for American expansionism or was a time when Americans settled land that they didn't belong to and brutalized the indigenous people, is because some people were doing that and some people were being good. It's a big, what I love about the book is that it made it come alive by showing there was a lot of complexity back there. It wasn't, nothing was black and white. And I think the flaws in Sam's character are the flaws he had, but also the fact that he assumed, because he knew more, he was better than them. And that got him into trouble.
I agree. Any other thoughts on that comment?
Yeah, I thought it was so interesting. I thought Darryl Brock did a great job in freeing up Sam from the 20th century, or the, not, 1980s, 90s. He freed him up. He made him the only child uh, of a couple where the father ran off and the mother died when he was a child. He was raised by his grandparents. By the time he's an adult and ready to travel back in time, his grandparents are deceased. His marriage is broken up. His daughters have gone with his wife, and he creates this scenario where and he hates his job, and his boss doesn't particularly think he's doing a good job, and he frees him up to make this time travel. And that's what I kind of got that sense as I was reading that wow, he really got this guy free of all this encumberment of the 20th century and got him to go back to the 19th century. Nobody's missing him, you know. So I thought that was kind of clever, the way he handled that, and he sent him back with all his flaws. Uh, he sent him back as a complete human being in a sense, with 20th century knowledge, but still the flaws of a person.
So the one problem I had with that, Peter, and I'm going to point this out real quick, and it's kind of a two-stage statement. I asked myself, does Sam have a clue? Or does Sam know things? And we could talk about Colm as well, and Colm knows things. I had a kind of a problem as I read this book, is that there were things that kind of, I felt if Sam is truly a 19th century, a 20th century newspaper reporter, there are things you should know about. You should know about the gold standard. You should know about Black Friday. You should know not make comments about Western gunslingers from the 1880s. Where are the cable cars? He said, well, if you're an educated newspaper man, you should know where these are. So why are these flaws there? Is it just these are part of his flawed character? And then just to kind of piggyback on that, I'm going to ask kind of an odd question. I'm going to ask the audience, is Sam creating history or is he changing it? It's the butterfly effect. We have home runs. There was a lot of talk about this home run, that home run. Well, I don't know. I never really pictured the Stockings as home run hitters. I guess I had more of a small ball type in my mind or whatever have you. Playing vintage baseball, a home run is as fast as you can run because there's no fence. But Sam talked about these mighty clouts, hot dogs and hamburgers and sodas. It said that 5 people lay claim to the hamburger. He installed gates and he apparently created home on the range. So my question is, does he have a clue? But also, is he creating history or is he changing it?
I didn't think the book was that much about how history was changed or when he went back, as it was just a matter of placing somebody in a different time and having to have him adapt, as opposed to say something like Back to the Future, where the whole theme of that movie was what is Marty McFly doing to change things in the future, or Stephen King's book on JFK. But I was aware of it, and I suppose it would be a big thing. He got the hot dogs going. Maybe Harry Stevens never existed or something like that, but it didn't seem to be within the realm of the book to be doing that. So I just kind of took it as it went.
Any other sentiments? Or everybody just loves Sam?
Well, Sam
Certainly do.
is this narrator character, but he's also the thing that makes the action move forward because of where he's going and who he gets involved with. And it's the I don't know, character of the author to move the story along. I've been thinking here the last couple minutes about the other book of that era of the fictional baseball book was The Celebrant, and they had that jeweler in there who moved the action along as he was idolizing Christy Mathewson and fighting with John McGraw and all those sort of things. I just think it's more of a technique, an author's technique. He had to have somebody like that. Now, whether he wanted to make him fuller than just pointing things out, he wanted to have some flaws also. Good writers do that.
Mhm. I'm actually glad, Paul, you said you didn't like. I had a hard time. It took me a while to like Sam at all. My initial reaction was not a positive one toward him, especially as a main character, but obviously he was meant to be flawed, but I did grow to like him more at the end. I saw him evolve a little bit as a person. I especially like his relationship with Johnny, right? In the bike, in the track, and the race, and when he set up the race for Johnny and allowed him to win, and so on. Then he went into the Bowery there and kind of got him out of a difficult situation, or it was just a bad situation there and everything. So I did appreciate him more toward the end of the book.
My take on it was that he may be quite well versed in 20th century. 1980, he's got it totally knocked. But then you go back to 1880 and he's out of his element, and he would be quite unsure about things, the culture at that time. So I think that he would be naive at that time, even though he would be well versed in 20th century ideas. But I think anybody thrown back into that time, I mean, when you look at it, how would you exist if you went back to 1880? you know, what would your life be about? You would not be able to function as you did in the 20th century. So I think there was a bit of naivete, even though he tried to get by, but he didn't flaunt anything that I didn't see anything that he was flaunting. I just saw somebody who was from the 20th century, naive in the 19th century.
Fair enough.
Mm.
So I'm gonna ask another question here, and I mean we really can't talk about Sam without talking about this. So my question is, who is Sam? And I'm gonna read just a couple of quotes that I took out of the book, and I'm gonna put these out to you guys. Obviously, I would like to know, is Sam calm? Quote, either I'd been summoned by Colm, or in fact I'd once been Colm. That was my best guess, and that was how I felt to me during the experience. And finally, I was reliving it all, and then as starkly clear as if I'd always known. Well, I think I got left in that train station so this could happen. It's all part of it, and somehow she knew. That's when he's talking to Andy about the death of their mom and about paying for it. It's fairly unsettling to learn that your body seems to remember its own death, and your brain holds a picture of your killer, and now it was to die again. And then the last thing is with this, the apparition when he takes the gold, the great bird. The great bird is there, and the apparition of Colm when O'Donovan is pushed. So what my thought was, and this is what I was thinking about when I kept reading this. I don't know if anybody's ever seen the movie The Crow, with Brandon Lee back in the day. Basically, it's Brandon Lee is killed, and he's buried, and he essentially comes back to right his wrongs as a manifestation of a crow. So there's actually, I think it's Native American. There's other mythos that if it's unfinished business, someone will come back as a bird. So is Sam Colm is the main question I have.
Well, so that's what the
You
crow
look
is doing up in my tree.
perplexed.
The one that's yakking at me all day long. Aha, I better listen to him better next time.
It's probably
Okay.
it's probably a disgruntled Yankees fan coming back to haunt you.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, I was looking at
Gotcha.
it this morning, and he caused twice, which I'm not sure what that means. 3 times means that he's just communicating. 4 times is a warning. So I don't know what the 2 cause are, unless he was telling the other crow to stay away from the French fries I threw out for him.
What if he calls 27 times? Does that count or not?
I know. He falls out of the tree.
But
Exhaust.
okay, enough
right.
kidding aside. Is Sam Colm?
Was he just leaving that for us to decide?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm throwing it out there. I mean, I could give you my opinion. I think he is either a manifestation of the bird, like I mentioned in The Crow, or I also was thinking of the old 80s and now current time travel Quantum Leap, where he actually leaps into someone. So my question to the audience is Sam Colm? I didn't expect silence.
Do
I
you have
really
another
did not.
No.
Do you have another question?
Yeah, yeah.
Do I have another? Nobody wants to volunteer that one, huh?
It doesn't seem that there's. Thanks.
I have a question I want to raise.
Okay.
It goes to the preposterousness, for want of a better term, of time travel. And to take another movie as an example, coming up, Groundhog Day, once you get past the preposterousness of it, that is central to how that story would evolve. Would this story be a better story, a different story, not the same as a story, had the primary character not been a time traveler, but simply been somebody of his age?
So you mean as far as when I'm sorry, I was distracted for a moment. When you say someone of his age, do you mean someone of
Of that era.
Sam's age or what?
Yeah, no, somebody
Of
of
that
the
era.
somebody of that period. He's the protagonist, but he is just somebody who lives in that particular era.
I don't know.
Why
I
is it
never really.
important that he be a time traveler as opposed to simply somebody who is in the fiction? It's still a work of fiction, but it could be a character who is of that age rather than somebody who's come back 100 years or more.
I think
the thing. Go ahead,
the,
Joanne.
the time traveler aspect of it, I think, works very well because it gives you the comparison, the contrast between the two eras to see how somebody who has 20th century mentality, how he would act in 1880. And I think, or 60, or, in the 19th century. And it's to see how that person would adapt or not. And that gives that tension in the story. Yes, you can work it with somebody from that era, but I think you have to add a little bit more eccentricity to that character in order to make it sort of that same balance.
I mean, you could argue that Mark Twain was a character, though, of the 19th century, was a modern person that we would, identify with and know in today's world. And so a character of that type could have prospered in that particular era. I mean, it is, there's obviously elements that wouldn't fit, but I often think that in some respects, the 1980s, when he was writing the book, are in some respects closer to the 1880s than they are to today's world. And I'm always struck at, and I'll take another movie, Local Hero, where the hero goes to Scotland to try to buy up land, and his only means of communicating with Knox Oil and Gas back in Houston is in a red telephone booth. Well, that would be preposterous today. There's so many other means of communication, right?
Right, yeah. That's right, yeah. And there's the tension. Yeah, that adds to the
What do you guys?
Absolutely.
What do people think ultimately? What did Sam want? He said, "I'd give anything to be a baseball hero, but he doesn't follow the Stockings home to the end. He lost his position, but still was not with the Stockings." And then he said, "I wished I could find a pathway from one family to another, one time to another."
He wants Kate and he wants to go home. Ultimately, but then again, that comes up better in the second book anyway, but of course that's more tension.
Does the second book kind of give the answers to some of the things that we've asked here?
It does. Some of them, not
really.
exactly.
Yeah, not exactly.
It asks more questions too.
Yeah. That's why I wanted a third book.
Yeah.
Kind of like if J.R.R. Tolkien had stopped after his second book and didn't do the trilogy, right? You'd be left saying, what the heck happens here,
Right, yeah.
So I know we're running short on time, but I'm going to throw one other thing out here just as more of a comment. And Joanne, I know you actually talked about this before. One of the things that I really, really did enjoy about this, and this is what I kind of mentioned in my bio when I actually wrote it up about the book, he really does an amazing job of actually creating a picture, like an actual, like I felt almost, for lack of a better word, a moving picture of that. I call it, like, chapter 13 jumped out at me. I called it a photograph of Cincinnati. When I read about Porkopolis, it brought me back to Upton Sinclair's The Jungle. The same was what I think was interesting about when you talked about Promontory Point. I always had this idyllic image of Promontory Point as this amazing, like, wow, this is where they met, and it was really a hole. I really thought, we talked about the low grade coal, how people covered their mouths. One thing I thought it was really interesting, what made me think about it is, I think when we, as 21st century Americans, picture these places, we're only looking at it from, the photographs as a one dimension. We really feel like more of these idyllic images. We think of these Elysian field memories, idyllic, and we show them as perfect, and we show them as green, and we think of Tom Gilbert's description of the Elysian fields, and we somehow think that that's everywhere. And I really feel like this is a really good book that tells us, no, it was bad. It was really bad in a lot of places. And I that was one of my, I think still to this point, my favorite reads or ways to look at that book was I really felt like it was flipping through a living photograph album. So
He did his homework. He really did.
very much so.
Yeah, he
Very
did,
much
and I
so.
think that's what really makes it the book that it is, very unique. You know, as I said, I've read a few the time travel novels and everything, but I find that this one was really good because not only about the way he got him into it, so seamlessly, really, but it was a homework. And besides that, I'm a huge Mark Twain fan also. So he was giving me a lot of the gifts that I look for in books, besides the fact that he writes extremely well. Read Havana Heat also. That's another very well written book, and I wish he had written more. Enough said.
I have a quick comment. Based upon what Joanne was saying about the things that she liked. When I was working on the early Chicago White Stockings, I got to know a lot of the characters pretty well from reading all the countless newspaper reports. And William Craver was always regarded as kind of a badass on those early Chicago teams. And he had that exact same image in this book, especially when he was playing with Sam, and he gave Sam a hard time about using a glove and calling him a sissy and everything. And I thought that is exactly the type of thing that I picked up when I was reading about the Chicago team. You know, the personalities were exactly the same. I thought.
So I know we are about out of time, but I'm going to ask one more question, just simply because I want to know, and this has bothered me every time I've read the book. So I want to ask a question about Caitlin. I want to know, what do people think of the quilt? Who is Caitlin to Sam? And if the quilt was his grandmother's, how did it exist? Like, what I almost kept thinking that they were somehow related, but if you read the second one, you'll understand that they're really not. And forgive me, Joanne, I don't remember if they talk about the quilt in the second one, but I don't know if anybody wants to lend a quick 2 cents on that sentiment.
Well, the quilt was old, and perhaps it's one of these full circle ideas. In other words, somehow it came up through through the decades, and that she knew about it. I think it's one of those romance, things. It's one of the ploys that they use for that, for a connection between the two of them. Yeah, I had thought also whether or not that they were related, but of course that did not pan out. But I think it was because it was an old artifact, and it was a connection over time. A linear connection over time. That was my guess anyway, because I was hoping the same thing.
Yeah, it was just kind of weird, but
he was teasing us. He was.
Yeah.
It's one of those the myriad numbers of things that were in that book that did exactly the same thing, that kept you going. For one, oh, well, now what's going to happen? What does this have to do with? Oh, I got to watch out for this one coming up. What does this have to do with anything? And that makes for a really good story. I have to really recommend him, and we should find him and see whether or not he's capable of reading another book.
Well, that's a great segue. If we would like to read Two in the Field, I asked this of everyone. I am more than willing to moderate it, and maybe we can get some luck and actually tracking Darryl down. But if the powers that be would like to, the powers that be, I'm sorry, if the audience would like to read Two in the Field, I wouldn't mind doing that after our next go around here of a few books. So if you guys are interested, I'll definitely do that, because I think it does tie up some things, and it's still, I mean, like you said, Joanne, it's not as good, but it's still a solid read.
Right.
It's not
my
terrible.
expectations were too high. Yeah, I mean, it really was.
It's,
I mean, I should have cut him a little slack, but
I mean, I think the best thing I could say about it is this one ends on a cliffhanger, and you're like, what happens?
well,
now
that's it.
you figure it out.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's like season 2.
John Thorne might have insight onto Darryl Brock. John ran Total Sports Publishing, and Darryl did those books for him. And the caveat there is about 2003, and this is after Total Sports Publishing went out of business, and which means that creditors, I had lunch with Darryl Brock's agent. She did not speak well of John, but I'd expect that. Darryl might have accepted the fact that company goes out of business. Agents can be more protective, and John is a fair-minded person too. I'm not sure if the fact that Darryl was his publisher 20 plus years ago, but that might be a place for starting to track down Darryl.
Willing to give it a shot. So I just wanted to say I appreciate everybody. It's this was kind of a new thing for me. I appreciate it. It was fun. I enjoyed doing it.
You did great. Thank you.
Thank
Yep,
you.
thank
sure
you.
did. Thank you very much.
I'm
Yeah.
gonna hand it back over to Bob, and the New Yorker's gonna be quiet for a while.
Well, you can. I just thought you might want to hack into the Boston's truck GPS and send them to Calgary or something.
Oh, that'd be interesting. Yeah.
Peter, if you'd like to close us up now.
Okay, I just want to go with just one last thing about this. First of all, Paul, you did a fabulous job. You really got a conversation going here, and you proposing this novel was novel. Of course, we had been strictly going down the nonfiction route, and I think Bob and I will discuss this, and John, and we'll probably talk to you about doing the sequel as a follow up. I just want to go with something that Jack said at the very end. He talked about the character. Who was it again with the Chicago team?
William Craper.
Yeah,
Craver.
Graver.
yeah, and being such a type. So one of a couple of things that I picked up on at the beginning. Do we have time, Bob?
Yes.
Okay. One of the things I picked up on in the beginning was a couple of things struck me. Only 4 or 5, which was kind of remarkable because there were things that he put in as historic background or some background things that when he wrote this was the forward thinking on baseball history. But there were 4 or 5 things that have been disproven since. And those are the things that struck me. For example, he gets into Cartwright and, talks a little bit as he's taking that train across the country, going out to the West Coast. And he's thinking about Cartwright, making this journey, in a covered wagon. And he kind of recites again, the Johnny Appleseed version of Cartwright, which has, if you read Monica Mitrione and a few others, you find out that's largely been disproven because his diary, Cartwright's diary, had been rewritten by his grandson. So Cartwright, there was really no record of Cartwright ever playing ball on the road. He may have, but there's no record of it. So there were things like that I'm sure that he went to as a source, which were real sources then when he wrote the book, but have subsequently been, disproven. And this has been a really, really great conversation, Paul, again. And I want to talk about what's coming up in our 19th century book series pretty soon again. About a month from now, I think we have it. What date is it? The 21st of
21st, I think it is.
Yeah, I
Isn't
think it is
Yeah.
the 21st. I have it here.
Yeah.
Jack Bales will be discussing Peter Morris's book, But Didn't We Have Fun? And I read this book many, many years ago when it was first written, and I've been giving it a reread, and it's just chock full. Here it is. Yeah, it's chock full of interesting, facts about baseball history and so forth. It's nonfiction. And then following that by about a month, Matt Albertson will be doing in March, the end of March, he'll be doing our third of the winter series, Outside the Lines of Gilded Age Baseball. This is in the 1880s. And he'll talk a little bit about that. That's actually a series of 3 books, so we might have a follow-up on those too. So without further ado, again, Paul, thank you. Thanks everybody for tuning in this evening. I'll send out another email tonight that'll remind anybody who's interested in the 19th Century Baseball Speaker Series. We have that coming up in another couple of weeks, and I'll get the email out tonight. All right, Bob.
Just to
Thank
note
you.
that will be done by Matt Albertson, also on the Philadelphia. I think it's 1895, and the fans voting for favorite players, which was a very common thing in the 1890s. If you go to the Hall of Fame, there's a half a dozen cups that I know the Giants did it several times, where they select Mike Donlin or someone like that as their most popular player.
Right, and the way they pulled that's what Matt will be presenting. And the way they did that is the scorecard vote. They used actual scorecards or a portion of a scorecard to put in before you left the ballpark. And that was their way of taking that survey. All right, again, thank you very much, and thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks if the 19th series, or in a month for another book series. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Have a
Thanks,
good night,
everybody.
everybody.
Thanks, Paul, very
Take care.
much.
You're welcome. Take care.
Nice job, Paul.
Thank you.